This week we celebrate Friday the 13th with a look back at the history of horror games. Some are cheesy, some are funny, but others are truly terrifying. Scary games have been around since the 70s, so there's plenty to look through. This is Player Attack. Hi, I'm Jessica Citizen, and this week we've seen a whole bunch of big new announcements come out of GDC and PAX East. First up, prepare your surprised faces. Rock Band 4 is a real thing, coming to PlayStation 4 and Xbox One by the end of the year. Details at this stage are fairly slim, but we do know that the developers are aiming to make this new version of the game completely compatible with all of your old music, and most importantly, all of your old instruments, so you shouldn't need to rush out to get new plastic guitars. Bethesda has also announced something new, and this one really was a bit of a surprise. Following the success of Wolfenstein: The New Order, we all knew that BJ Blazkowicz was back, but we all anticipated a pile of DLC would be next on the to-do list. Not so. The team at Machine Games has now revealed a standalone prequel, Wolfenstein: The Old Blood, a two-part mission set in 1946 when the Nazis were on the brink of winning World War II. This is not a big name, big budget release. It'll be a little bit cheaper and a little bit shorter than the original game when it launches in May, but it does set the scene for bigger things to come. Now, it is Friday the 13th and we do have a massive horror themed special coming up for you a little later in the show, but one title that has snuck in too late to be included is Five Nights at Freddy's 3, which hit Steam this week. It is, like you'd expect, more of the same, because if something ain't broke, why fix it? Developer Scott Cawthon has already released a new teaser image on his website, but instead of suggesting the fourth outing of the terrifying animatronics, he seems to be hinting that number 3 may be the end of the series. And going back to something that we covered last week, Capcom has confirmed it will add local co-op to the PC version of Resident Evil Revelations 2, after originally saying it would break the game. An enterprising modder added the function shortly after release, thus proving that it could be done, and now the studio has stepped up, admitting it was wrong. Valve also made headlines again this week after the big reveal of its Vive VR headset with HTC. Some were expecting further models to be announced, but instead the developer preferred to focus on a few other things instead. First up, after years of speculation and rumour, the Source 2 engine has finally been announced. We first heard about the engine's development back in 2012 when Gabe Newell himself confirmed that it was in the works. Then we saw a couple of leaks last year, a new version of Left 4 Dead, a curiously named folder in Dota 2, but this is the first official announcement from the studio. The original Source engine is now 10 years old and has provided the backbone for Valve games since Half-Life 2 and Counter-Strike Source. The question now, what game will Valve launch alongside the new software to show it off? Valve also took the opportunity to show GDC audiences what it claims is the final design of its Steam controller, due out by the end of the year. After what feels like countless revisions, the latest configuration features triggers, bumpers, touchpads complete with haptic feedback, and 2 extra buttons on the back of each side of the controller. For those of you who are trying to count, that means there are 6 buttons on the back of the gamepad, plus the ones on the front. Despite the idea sounding ridiculously complicated and pictures not quite doing it justice, early reports suggest that the controller is actually pretty comfortable to use and can be programmed to emulate a keyboard and mouse control without too much drama. Time will tell, of course, and the Steam controller is planned to hit shelves in November. Coming your way even sooner than a Steam controller is the open world experience of Mad Max, which Warner Bros. Has finally announced will be released in September. But if you are hoping to pick this one up on Xbox 360 or PS3, you're out of luck. It's now exclusively PC, PS4 and Xbox One only. Also arriving in a similar time frame is the beta for Blizzard's upcoming shooter Overwatch, scheduled to kick off in the North American fall. The developer took to the stage at PAX East, introducing 2 new characters, Western outlaw Jessie McCree and Zarya, the game's first female tank, who is being heralded as a pink-haired hero of body diversity. In amongst all of this good news though, there is some sad. It is the end of an era as EA closes the Emeryville Maxis studio, best known as the home of SimCity. The company explains that the studio's other branches, which focus on The Sims as well as an assortment of mobile releases, will remain open, although some of those also suffered job cuts this week, and those games will not be affected. And finally this week, back to some happy stuff. GDC was also home to a whole stack of big announcements through the ID at Xbox program, with more than 30 studios showing that indie game development really is a big deal. Some highlights included The Flame in the Flood, which is a new project for a handful of former AAA developers, including the art director from BioShock. Retro platformer Shovel Knight is coming to new platforms, bringing with it the beloved characters from Battletoads. Australian-developed Screen Cheat is inspired by GoldenEye 007. And a little game known as Wasteland 2 is coming soon to both Xbox One and PlayStation 4. For more information on any of these stories, or to keep up to date with the latest gaming news, head to playerattack.com. But for now, stick around, we've got plenty more still to come. We love a good themed episode here at Player Attack, and in honour of Friday the 13th, we decided it would be a good opportunity to look back at some of the scariest video games that have graced our screens over the years. Some are stupidly cheesy, others are genuinely terrifying, and some are just so bad they're, well, bad, but we have found a few gems lurking in the dark shadows of history. Predictably, horror games are quite often violent games, and they generally cover adult themes, so if you're easily offended, don't like blood and gore, or simply prefer your games a little more family friendly, maybe come back next week.
Video games and horror have always gone together like horny teens and high body counts. When the Magnavox Odyssey first waddled onto the scene back in 1972, it came packaged with the creatively titled Haunted House. Games for the Odyssey required two things: plastic overlays for your TV and a crap ton of imagination. Unsurprisingly, gamers suffered more stress-induced fear setting up the console and hoping it worked than they did from Haunted House. Jump forward 10 years. Odysseys were now being used as doorstops, and the Atari 2600 was king. And totally not setting things up for the video game crash of 1983.
1982 brought a new Haunted House, because you could get away with verbatim titles back then and nobody was really looking for imagination. This was Atari's foray into horror gaming. You played as a disembodied pair of eyes, navigating a spooky mansion looking for pieces of an urn. Along the way you encountered spiders, bats, ghosts, and painful Atari 2600 sound effects. The game might not look like much now, but it got one of the longest lasting gaming genres into homes and gave parent groups something to complain about for years to come.
The rest of the decade was dominated by Nintendo's little console that could, the NES. Still predominantly seen as an entertainment medium for kids back then, Nintendo made some bizarre licensing choices and allowed some games based off R-rated movies onto their console. Friday the 13th came first in 1989 and was a faithful adaptation of the film, complete with zombies, swooping vampire bats, and Jason rocking his signature purple tracksuit. Okay, maybe the developers only read the cliff notes of the movie, but the game was still pretty dark. You had to run around Camp Crystal Lake, avoid Jason, and save kids, you heard me, kids, from meeting a grisly end.
But wait! That was actually the second game to star Jason Voorhees. There was one that came out a little earlier in 1985 for the Commodore 64. It was terrible, picking up review scores of 3 and 4 out of 10, and unless you were young enough that you probably shouldn't have been playing the game anyway, it wasn't what you'd call scary. The music, on the other hand, was spectacular.
The other baffling addition to the NES library was A Nightmare on Elm Street. That's right, the knife-fingered, child-murdering Freddy Krueger got to be on the same platform as Mario. Nightmare on Elm Street was shown the same amazing artistic respect as its adaptation of Friday the 13th. You controlled some kid, probably Johnny Depp, on a quest to collect Freddy's bones that had become scattered all over Elm Street for some reason. On the way, you fight off every conceivable PG-13 spooky thing you can think of. Spiders, ghosts, birds, Frankensteins, crippling self-doubt, it's all there. On the release, this was slammed as a Castlevania ripoff. Hey, there's another NES title for you there. But quickly came a bargain bin title.
Moving on from the 8-bit powerhouse, in the late 80s arcades were still going strong and were exclusively a place where the cool kids hung out. Emphasis there on kids. Walking in, you'd see your inoffensive games like Galaga, Space Invaders, Donkey Kong, and what's that? Splatterhouse, a delightful side-scroller built around smashing monsters against a wall with a chunk of wood and cutting them up with a cleaver and fighting skinless babies. This one was actually remade in 2010 for the PS3 and Xbox 360, boasting a stylized art style and a killer soundtrack, but it lost some of its charm in its later incarnation.
Before you cry, someone please think of the children! There was an even worse offender out there. Chiller. Sure, it sounds like a reject Michael Jackson single, but Chiller was the first torture porn game ever. We can't show it to you, but trust me, that shit's messed up.
Horror games up until this point didn't have the capacity to actually scare anyone. Shock people, sure, but to scare people more than just parents and politicians? Not so much. That was until Alone in the Dark hit PCs in 1992. Harnessing the mighty power of DOS, Alone in the Dark was the first 3D horror game of its kind, using polygonal characters over pre-rendered backgrounds. Alone in the Dark was something new, focusing on creating a foreboding Lovecraftian atmosphere, solving puzzles and avoiding enemies instead of barging into combat. Sound familiar? That's because this was the birth of survival horror. Surprisingly, although it was a critical hit, Alone in the Dark didn't sell very well.
Around the same time, something truly horrific was sweeping the industry. Full motion video. Many devs and publishers thought this was the future of the medium. For those that have never been exposed, brace yourself. It features very little gameplay, and the visuals worse than a 144p YouTube video. It did, however, give us the best, marginally interactive, Z-grade horror movie Night Trap. You play as a voyeuristic special agent, using a secret camera to protect a teenage girl's slumber party. Kinda like Five Nights at Freddy's, you cycle through cameras looking for bad guys, who are wonderfully overacting, and capture them with Home Alone style traps. The content is wicked PG, but Night Trap stirred up enough controversy that it was one of the games that led to the creation of both the American ESRB rating system and the Australian classification system of video games, which then remained untouched until 2013. The 90s. What a crazy time.
The crazy didn't stop there though. Imagine, if you can, a time before the first-person shooter. These days, they're everywhere, with the same few titles being rehashed and reinvented every year or two. But it wasn't always like that, and there is one game we can thank for catapulting the genre to where it is today. Doom. In 1993, this game was as revolutionary as it was shocking. Blood, demons, guns, a protagonist with a well-chiseled jaw, the concern of lawmakers. Doom had everything, including a legacy that continues to this day.
It wasn't until 1996 that a game would be released that would set the course for horror gaming for the next 15 years. That game? Resident Evil. Taking everything Alone in the Dark did 4 years earlier and cranking it up to 11, Resident Evil sold better than beer at a ball game. The game was unique for the time, offering 2 different campaigns depending on who you picked at the beginning. Hot tip, always go Jill. Not only is she badass, but she starts with a gun. Resident Evil also showcased the power of the PS1, cementing it as the console of choice for the newly emerging older gamer market.
Hey, what's going on?
Jill? Is that you, Jill? What happened?
Barry, help me please. The door won't open. Quick!
Stay away from the door, Jill. I'm gonna kick this door down. Hurry! This way!
Resident Evil also saw 2 sequels on the PS1 in 1998 and 1999, and was set to become the undisputed king of survival horror. That was until Konami unleashed the underwear-destroying Silent Hill. Silent Hill focused more on creating a disturbing atmosphere and straight up messing with your mind to produce fear, instead of the visceral action-orientated scares of games before it. Both Resident Evil and Silent Hill continued to petrify audiences after the PlayStation 2 dropped in 2000, with releases of Code Veronica and Silent Hill 2, which is totally one of the best games of all time. True fact, don't dispute me on it.
Alpha team is flying around the forest.
There are only 3 STARS members left now. Captain Wesker, Barry, and myself. We don't know where Chris is.
What is this place?
Not quite your ordinary house, that's for sure.
Hey, Wesker, where's Chris?
Jill, no. You don't want to go back out there.
Hidden amongst its kid-friendly library, the GameCube has 2 of the greatest horror games of the 6th generation consoles. First up, the stunning re-release of Resident Evil. The remake had beautiful visuals and gameplay tweaks that reintroduced a whole new generation of gamers to the horror classic. The second game was far more unique. Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem was not a game you expected to see on a squeaky clean Nintendo system. A survival horror, much like Resident Evil, Eternal Darkness had you battling monsters as well as your own insanity. The sanity mechanic caused some weird meta things to happen. Sure, your character's head might fall off in the game, but that's nothing compared to the game itself making you think it's deleting all of your save data. Well played, Eternal Darkness. Well played.
This isn't really happening!
As time went on, horror games underwent some changes, for better and for worse. They shifted away from some of the more frustrating elements that made them survival horror, and became more empowered action games with horror elements. This shift can probably be traced back to the fantastic release of Resident Evil 4, which focused more on combat than its predecessors.
I'm under the President's order to rescue you.
What? My father?
From there, we saw floodgates open with games like Dead Space, Fear, Alan Wake, Condemned, and more recently, The Evil Within.
These days, the term horror is thrown around fairly loosely, applied to games that might have 1 or 2 scary elements rather than something that's been designed to scare the pants off of you. Games like the Dead Rising series are about as frightening as a loaf of bread, relying heavily on cheesy humour and over-the-top schlocky action. Zombies, the undead, or zombie-like creatures are crawling from their graves in just about every game that gets a major release, with most of them coming from the Fast and Hungry camp rather than the Romero-style lurchers. They're even being added into games where there is no story explanation for them, and it's getting kinda tired.
Let's go! Are you bitten? Soldier, look at me! Are you bitten? What happened down there? You're okay. You're safe now, son. There's not many of us left. Jesus. You seeing this?
That said, developer Frictional Games chose to look to the past to find out what made survival horror games so scary in the first place, and in 2010 released Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Focusing on removing all power from the player, Amnesia had you exploring a creepy gothic castle and forced you to run or hide from enemies instead of engaging them. You know, like a regular person. Unsurprisingly, it was a smash.
And boom! Like that, the bizarro opposite for the action horror game was born. The premise was ingeniously simple. Build atmosphere, have something stalk the player, add limited player input, and rely predominantly on the age-old magical jump scare. Popular games like Slender, Outlast, and Five Nights at Freddy's have got this formula down packed. And hey, if that's your thing, all the power to you. But to me, horror gaming feels like it's taken a step back in recent years. It's getting predictable and formulaic again, which is a sign that we need the next big revolution in horror like Resident Evil or Amnesia was. What will the future of horror gaming hold? Who knows? But I can tell you, my body is ready. Not that ready.
And that's about it for this edition of Player Attack. Thanks for watching. Next week, Jackson will tell us all about Final Fantasy Type 0 HD, if we can drag him away for long enough. We also check out ID at Xbox darling Ori and the Blind Forest, and explore the new city builder on the block, Cities Skylines. In the meantime, you can catch us on playerattack.com. We're on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and if you've got something you want to say, send us an email, mailbox@playerattack.com, or just hop on our forums. Till next week, I'm Jessica Citizen, and this is Player Attack.